history lesson of Kintsuchi Fujii's career overview. I'm going to talk a little more about his life and a little more about his gardens. And I just can't help but think how delighted he would be. This is a man who came to the U.S. at age 28. Soon after arriving, wanted to build gardens, did not build gardens until he'd been in the U.S. for 20 years, until he was in his 50s. And none of those gardens that he built in the late 1920s and early 30s survive. This is the only one that survives. It was his masterwork. Undoubtedly, he wanted to build more, but as we know, his career as a garden builder was cut short. Donna said that, the timing today is December 14th, and then December 16th is when Tuna Canyon Detention Center was opened. On December 12th, 2 days before today, 1954, 3 years before he died, Kintsuchi Fujii became a naturalized citizen. So we're right between these two important dates in his life. So Kintsuchi Fujii wrote an autobiography. However, it was sort of rejected for publication, and then he was interviewed by an early Japanese-American historian. And when I ran across Kintsuchi's son, the late Frank Fujii, who was also a gardener at Lotus Land in Montecito, Frank very kindly lent me all of his grandfather's documents, including a number of the photos that you see up there, talking about the history of this garden. And until that time, we didn't know who built the garden. That history was lost until the 1990s. At any rate, let me fill in a little more of Kintsuchi Fujii's life. So he came to the U.S. in 1903 at age 28, a single man. He first came to San Francisco, then moved south to Oxnard, where he worked on a sugar beet farm, promised $5 a day. He received about a third of that, and he and other workers, Japanese and Mexican, protested. They formed a so-called Workers' University, Rodo Daigaku, and Justice Club, Seigi Kurup, and protested the low wages that they were being paid. He quit farming life. He had trained as a carpenter as a young man. It was a family profession. He moved to Santa Barbara in March 1904, built a new restaurant at the Potter Hotel, learned English at night school, built a small roof garden, and with a friend had a connection to build a large Japanese garden for Mrs. Thomasella Graham, whose estate is still present in Sierra Madre. However, Fujii's friend died, brokenhearted, in a kind of arranged marriage scam. The friend died. Fujii did not build this garden for Graham, so his early desire to build gardens was thwarted. He then does 100 different part-time jobs. In Santa Barbara, he builds some billiards parlors and runs billiard parlors in Santa Barbara for a lot of Japanese workers who've moved south to Southern California after the San Francisco earthquake. He then leaves in 1910 Santa Barbara for Chicago, stopping briefly at Devil's Slide in Utah to work as a cook for a lot of Japanese workers in a cement factory. In 1911, he starts working at carnivals around the Midwest. He would help, in his autobiography, he says, on Sunday we'd go to the next town, on Monday all the workers would rent the tent, and then Tuesday through Saturday he worked in a carnival. He worked briefly on a chicken ranch in St. Louis with his friend, the painter Yamashiro, building chicken coops and then tending them. That was not what he wanted to do. He keeps moving on. I'm going to skip over a bunch of things, but he's in Chicago working again, and he meets a guy named Kushibiki Yumindo, who is a major entrepreneur building kind of Japan attractions at World's Fairs. And through this guy Yumindo, who's a major figure, Fujii works on the Japan Beautiful Theater at the 1915 San Francisco World's Fair. Indeed, the son had his badge, of his grandfather's badge from that. He does quite well that work as a carpenter, and then he actually helps run some of the Beautiful Japan concessions at the San Francisco World's Fair, opens several more businesses, a import-export store in Mill Valley. He sells shrimp wholesale. He works carnivals again, LA, San Francisco. So you can see he is really doing everything to kind of keep himself together in these tough decade and a half. but he always has the dream, he writes, that he wants to build a Japanese garden, a commercial tea garden. The one that's now at the Huntington was originally at California in Fair Oaks, run by G.T. Marsh. There's a whole genre of commercial tea gardens, many of them run by Japanese immigrants, and this is Kintsuchi Fujii's dream. However, does not come to pass. In 1917, he returns to Japan. 1916, gets married, and then comes back to America with his wife. They arrive in San Francisco. They move to Salt Lake City. He runs a import-export store called Nippon Art Store. They advertise, quote, dry goods, art and novelties, Chinaware, a specialty. That kind of starts to flail. He then moves on to Virginia and works in Virginia in 1921 in Norfolk, a restaurant and then an import-export store. Doesn't work out, comes back to Los Angeles in 1922, and now he's going to really pursue his dream to build gardens. He worked on gardens in Beverly Hills. He builds a Peace Tower in Balboa Park and a small Japanese garden down in Newport Beach. And then he writes a letter, and he takes out an ad in magazines in which he states his desire is to, quote, my ambition is to leave a real, uncompromising Japanese garden in the United States. He says that his father had worked on the garden of Prince Mori in Yamaguchi, and that he grew up with gardens, and that he's seen many, quote, compromise amongst Japanese gardens in America, especially in Southern California. He says, I've seen compromises with Western ideas of landscape which result in the destruction of the very soul of the art of Japanese garden architecture. He points out the inevitable cement lanterns and semicircular wooden bridges. Although we all love the Huntington now, it was built in 1912 with a circular bridge and cement lanterns and cement rocks. Maybe this is what he has in mind. And he talks about that he is, in his gardens that he wants to build, he will present the spirit of real simplicity without losing their elegance. He also says he can build them relatively cheaply and easily using a network of friends. And in fact, the advertising works. In 1928, he gets a commission to build a gate, a tea house in a small garden at the estate of Laura Knight in Montecito. It burned in the 60s. Its lanterns were moved by his son to the garden at Lotus Land. Mrs. Knight was so impressed that she used a picture of her garden gate on her Christmas cards throughout the 1930s. Fujii then, through word of mouth of his clients, he designs a garden for Nathan Bensey, for Dan Sattler, in San Marcos Pass, Clarence Vivian in Santa Barbara, that's published in the LA Times, and then the Twin Peaks Ranch in Ojai, he builds a garden, and then he refurbishes the Japanese garden at Las Tejas Estate in Montecito. None of those survive, and they were, based on the photos and other evidence, probably fairly small. We don't know how he meets Charles and Ellamae Storrier Stearns, but in 1936, they hire him to come down from Santa Barbara to, in essence, live here. In late 36, they run into some financial problems, and he's laid off for 6 months, but he has fairly steady work for himself and his friends all the way until 1940, in which they're more or less finished, and then we know the history that happens after that. Before he died, a few years before he died, Disneyland had just opened. As we know, it's having its 70th anniversary, and he wanted to go. And according to Kintsuchi's son Frank, when his father came, he took the train from Santa Barbara to Anaheim, went to Disneyland by himself, and came back and said, it's like a giant Japanese garden. You wander through beautiful paths, you're immersed in this other world. And Fujii said, although I finally built some great gardens, like the one that we're in, I want to build more. I want to build one at the scale of Disneyland. And I think it's that through all the stuff that we've heard about his life, he's in every part of America. You know, North Dakota, Utah, Gila, which is just desolate territory between Phoenix and Tucson, where he didn't build any gardens, but he shot baskets. And he actually helped a friend build a small garden. He had this dream, and in his late 60s, that dream came true. Thank you.